Every story begins with a secret, long buried.
But to find the truth, she must walk into the place that buried it. When the lies fall, only the truth remains.
She didn't just reclaim the past, she rewrote the future.
The invitation. The invitation was tucked between a utilities bill and a coupon flyer, addressed in gold cursive to Ms. A. Daniels. No return address. No hint of the storm it would unleash. Amara Daniels stood in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, still in her housekeeping uniform, staring at the ivory envelope. She hadn't seen anything that elegant in years, not since the days when her mother, Janice Daniels, had once walked the glass-paneled executive halls of Vailtech Industries, back when she was a respected vice president. Before it all fell apart. The envelope practically whispered mockery. It was from Preston Vail, current CEO of Vailtech, and son of the late Walter Vail, a tech magnate whose clean image had been worshipped by the press. Preston had inherited not only the company, but also the curated legacy. And he had once inherited something else, a secret, hushed away, erased like chalk on corporate marble walls. Amara's hands trembled as she opened it. You are cordially invited to the Vailtech 50th Anniversary Gala. Dress code black tie. Location, the Vail Estate, Greenwich, Connecticut. The back bore a handwritten note, would love to see a familiar face. Preston. She hadn't seen Preston since she was 17. That day her mother had been escorted out of Vailtech headquarters publicly accused of embezzling company funds. A lie. One that had cost Janice her career, their family home, and eventually her life. Depression claimed her 4 years later quietly off the news radar. Preston never returned their calls. Amara knew what the invitation was. Not a reunion, not kindness. It was a test, maybe even a trap. Preston likely didn't even recognize the name Daniels anymore, just another black-sounding surname among the cleaning staff. The cruelty would be poetic, in a way. Still, Amara smiled to herself. He didn't know who she had become. For the past 2 years, she had worked in the Vail estate under a pseudonym. As Amber D., she scrubbed their marble floors, cleared their wine glasses, and listened. Always listening. Her college degrees were hidden away in a drawer, along with her birth certificate, the one that named Walter Vail as her biological grandfather. He thought he could bury the truth. But legacies built on lies always sink in time. Amara didn't just plan to attend the gala, she planned to rewrite the narrative. The return. The Vail estate loomed in the distance, bathed in moonlight, its sprawling Georgian architecture, a symbol of power control and secrets. The winding drive was lined with silver lanterns flickering in rhythm, like a heartbeat, building tension with every step Amara took in her heels. She had arrived not as a housekeeper but as a storm. Her gown was midnight blue, a custom design inspired by her mother's old sketches. She had found them in a box years ago marked, "When I Make It." Sleek, satin, sharp-shouldered, elegant. Around her neck, a small sapphire pendant, one of the few things her mother had kept from her time at Vailtech, a quiet piece of resistance. The valet barely concealed his confusion as he opened her door. "Name, miss." She handed him the embossed invitation. Amara Daniels. He blinked. "You're on the list. Right this way." She walked up the marble steps, slowly, as if the weight of 2 decades balanced on her shoulders. Inside the estate was glittering with opulence. Gold chandeliers, clinking glasses, designer gowns, and white teeth behind tight smiles. Amara noticed how the servers moved, silent, hurried, invisible, just like she had been. Preston stood at the center of it all, laughing loudly, glass in hand, surrounded by his high-profile guests. Silicon Valley investors, politicians, actors all orbiting around him like satellites. He hadn't changed, still the same smug smirk, still mistaking cruelty for charm. She saw the moment his eyes found her. His laughter faltered. Clarissa Vale, his wife, followed his gaze and whispered something under her breath. A few guests turned their heads whispering. Who was she? Who dared to show up unannounced in a dress that rivaled royalty? Amara offered a smile. Cool, poised, patient. The whispers began to shift. Not of mockery, of curiosity. Interest, uncertainty. Preston stepped forward, champagne in hand, wearing the same bravado he had mastered since college. Well, he said with a forced grin, you actually came. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Amara replied, her voice smooth as silk and twice as cutting. And here I thought you'd be too busy scrubbing tiles, he said, just loud enough for a few of his friends to chuckle. Amara tilted her head, unfazed. Funny how tiles and truths both shine under pressure. His brow furrowed, but he kept smiling. Around them, conversations resumed, but the air shifted. A tremor, a sense that something was coming. Something no one expected. Enjoy the party, Preston said tightly. Oh, I plan to, she answered. Tonight's about legacy after all, and I've brought mine with me. Across the room, Clarissa's curiosity turned to concern. She wasn't sure why Preston seemed rattled by this mystery guest, but she sensed the threat. In truth, Amara hadn't come for vengeance. She came to finish her mother's story, to claim what was hers, and to shine a light so bright that even the most protected shadow couldn't hide what had been done. Upstairs, locked in her hotel room, safe, were documents, voice recordings, old financial statements. Proof of the massive internal cover-up orchestrated 20 years ago, the one that blamed Janice Daniels for the very crime Preston committed to seize the company's control. Tonight, that evidence would change everything. But first, she would let him stew. The trap is set. The gala unfolded around Amara like an expensive illusion, strings of violins floating through the air, waiters gliding with silver trays, and conversations puffed with self-importance. But none of it distracted her. Every move she made was part of a plan years in the making. She walked the room with grace, exchanging polite nods with senators, CEOs, and socialites who didn't realize she knew more about them than their publicists did. She passed by men who had once leered at her in the servants' hallway, and women who had scoffed at her presence, assuming she was someone else, someone lesser. Now they noticed her, and they couldn't place her. What's your name again? Asked a tall man in a silver tuxedo, his third drink in hand. Amara Daniels, she replied. He looked puzzled. You with a firm media? She smiled. I'm with Legacy. He blinked. Sorry. She excused herself, leaving him confused. Across the ballroom, Preston couldn't stop watching her. Every time he laughed, his eyes darted toward her. Every toast he raised trembled just slightly. Clarissa noticed. You know her? She asked. Preston hesitated. She used to work here, I think. Cleaner or something. She looks like she owns the place, Clarissa said, unconvinced. She doesn't. Clarissa gave him a long look. She had seen that defensive twitch in him before, back when the board questioned a missing audit, when a journalist had gotten too close to the truth. That twitch meant danger. Preston, she said carefully. What aren't you telling me? He shook his head. Nothing. She's no one. But Clarissa wasn't so sure. Meanwhile, Amara moved quietly through the edge of the ballroom toward the side hallway she used to scrub every Monday afternoon. She knew where the security cameras were, knew how to avoid them. She slipped into the private gallery, a room off limits to most guests, where portraits of the Vale patriarchs hung in a row, stern and proud. And in the far corner, a sealed glass case spotlighted. Inside was the original blueprint of Vailtech's first computer chip. Beneath it, a bronze plaque, dedicated to Janice Daniels, former Vice President of Innovation. In memory. Amara stood before it, her face hardening. That plaque was the only thing left of her mother's legacy, and even that had been removed from public display years ago. Preston had ordered it moved here after media attention faded. He hadn't removed it out of guilt. He'd buried it out of fear. She took a breath and reached into her clutch, pulling out a small USB drive. She inserted it into the projection system on the nearby control panel, confirming the setup. A slideshow program auto-launched in the background, set to reveal everything: emails, legal documents, old camera footage, and most damning of all, Preston's own voice. Tonight she would say her piece. But when the system projected the first image, a photo of her mother and Walter Vail laughing beside a whiteboard, Amara froze. Her mother looked so happy, so full of belief, so unaware of the betrayal waiting. Amara's fingers trembled as she pressed pause and disconnected the drive. "Not yet," she whispered. "The moment's not right." She would wait, let Preston parade his ego, let him toast his own delusion, and when every eye was watching, she would drop the truth like thunder. As she returned to the ballroom, she was intercepted by a woman in her 50s, all pearls and perfume. "I just have to ask," the woman said, her smile brittle. "Who are you wearing?" Legacy Amara replied again. "It never goes out of style." She walked away, leaving the woman blinking, confused. Moments later, Preston climbed the stage. He tapped a crystal glass to gain silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming. "Tonight is not just a celebration of innovation. It's about family, tradition, values." Amara stood at the back, hands folded, eyes locked on him. 50 years ago, he continued, "My father, Walter Vail, founded this company in a garage, with little more than a dream and an idea." Amara's jaw clenched. A lie. Walter had co-founded Vailtech with Janice Daniels, her mother. She had designed the prototype chip. But when the company went public, her name disappeared, erased, repackaged into marketing myths. A black woman didn't fit the narrative, until now. Because tonight Amara had more than just truth. She had proof, unmasking the myth. And so Preston continued from the ballroom stage, arms spread like a priest delivering a sermon. "We carry forward the dream of one man who built this empire from nothing." Applause erupted. Amara didn't clap. She could see the irony better than anyone, how a company built by two minds had been reduced to the name of one. She let the applause die down before making her way through the crowd. People turned as she passed. They didn't know who she was, but they knew she wasn't ordinary. She was magnetic, intentional, and she was heading straight for the stage. Preston spotted her movement from the corner of his eye. His smile faltered. He turned toward the crowd again. "We owe everything to the visionaries who paved the way, like my father." "I'd like to say a few words," Amara said calmly, now standing just in front of the stage, loud enough for the microphone to catch. The room hushed. Preston froze. "Excuse me," he said into the mic, trying to laugh. "This isn't a open mic night." But Amara didn't break stride. She stepped onto the stage, in full view of the crowd, standing beside Preston, like she had been expected all along. Her voice, though soft, cut through the silence like a blade. "I won't take long." Clarissa stood up from their table. "Preston. Who is she?" He didn't answer. Amara looked at the audience, composed of the elite, the donors, shareholders, influencers, all the people who dictated which truths mattered. "My name is Amara Daniels," she said clearly, "and I am here to correct the story you've just been told." A rustle spread through the crowd. Preston tried to laugh again. "She's not. She's just one of our staff. Sorry, folks, bit of a mix-up." But Amara was ready. She took a remote out of her clutch, aimed it at the projector, and clicked. Behind her, on the massive screen above the ballroom stage, a black-and-white photo appeared, Walter Vail and Janice Daniels seated together in a lab in 1985, blueprint in hand. Preston's jaw locked. Gasps rippled across the room. My mother, Amara said, gesturing to the screen, was Janice Daniels, Vice President of Innovation. She co-founded Vailtech with Walter Vail. And she was also the woman this company tried to erase. Someone whispered, "That's not possible." Preston reached for the mic. This isn't verified." Amara didn't even glance at him. "I grew up watching my mother build this company. I watched her get betrayed by the board. I watched her get scapegoated when funds went missing. Funds that were embezzled by the man standing next to me." The screen changed again, this time to a scanned ledger with line items traced to offshore accounts, all tied to Preston Vail. The room erupted. Preston turned to her seething mic lowered. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Amara looked him in the eye, taking back what was stolen. He hissed, "You'll regret this." "No," she said. "You will." Back in the crowd, Clarissa Vail covered her mouth with her hand. She looked between Amara and Preston with horror, realizing what she was witnessing wasn't just scandal. It was history correcting itself. One of the guests, a business journalist named Owen Lasky, stood up from his table phone in hand. "Can you prove you're her daughter?" Amara smiled. The next slide showed Amara's birth certificate. Mother Janice Daniels, father unlisted. But next to it, an email internal from Walter Vail's personal account to his legal team, dated 1993. She deserves recognition, and she deserves protection. Amara will never have my name on paper, but make sure Janice's shares are secured in a silent trust. The email was damning. More murmurs, a ripple of disbelief. Some of it horror, some hope. Because in that moment, people were beginning to understand something. Amara Daniels wasn't an imposter. She was an heir, a rightful one, and she had just pulled the thread that would unravel everything. The collapse begins. Preston Vail was no longer smiling. He stood frozen beside Amara, face pale, sweat beading at his temple as the crowd in front of them turned from politely curious to stunned, and then to judgmental. Phones were now out. Dozens of them, recording, streaming, capturing history in real time. Amara stepped back from the microphone and clicked the remote again. The next slide displayed legal documentation, an amended trust agreement from 1994 with Walter Vail's signature and notarization establishing a trust for Janice Daniels' daughter. Her. This document, Amara said calmly, was hidden by company counsel after my grandfather's death. It grants my mother 20% equity in Vailtech, along with a silent trust established for me. She turned to Preston. But after her forced resignation, the trust was quietly dissolved, and the documents buried. "By your team, with your blessing." He stepped forward, grabbing the mic. "This is absurd. These are fabrications. The Daniels woman Janice was investigated and removed for theft." Amara turned unfazed. "You mean the theft you committed?" She clicked again. The ballroom projector displayed a transcript and email exchange between Preston and Vailtech's former CFO, discussing how to shift blame during an internal audit. Preston's words in black and white. "We'll pin it on her. The optics are clean. Nobody's going to fight for a single black woman VP." The room gasped. Clarissa Vail stood slowly at their table, her face pale as marble. Preston. Is this real? He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Amara turned toward Clarissa. Her voice softened just enough to reach the woman without sounding cruel. I don't blame you, she said. You didn't know. But you need to now. Clarissa sat down, stunned, folding her hands tightly in her lap. From the crowd, Owen Lasky raised his voice again. What's your endgame here, Ms. Daniels? Are you seeking financial compensation control of the company? Amara didn't flinch. I'm seeking the truth, she said. Justice and restoration. She paused, letting the room settle. I'm not here to burn this company down. I'm here to rebuild it properly so the next black girl who creates something brilliant isn't buried for it. A few scattered claps echoed through the hall. Then more. Then dozens. And then a full standing ovation. Preston stood like a statue as applause surrounded him, not for him, but for her. Amara leaned slightly toward him. Funny, isn't it? She whispered. You invited me as a joke, and I turned your gala into a courtroom. Backstage, the damage control had begun. Several board members were already on the phone. Lawyers, PR consultants, shareholders whispering into Bluetooth earpieces. Someone ran out to the valet. Others were desperately Googling Amara Daniels. Preston turned to leave the stage, but David Hightower, chair of the board, stepped up and blocked him. We're going to need your resignation, Hightower said flatly. You can't be serious, Preston muttered. But behind him, Clarissa whispered, You better sign it before they throw you out. Amara walked off the stage without looking back. She didn't need to. Preston Vale's downfall had already begun, and it was unraveling faster than anyone could stop it. But she wasn't finished yet. Because there was still one more truth the world didn't know. What really happened to her mother in the final weeks of her life. The final injustice. Amara stood alone in the gallery once more, the echoes of applause fading into the corridors behind her. In her hand, she held the sapphire pendant, her mother's. A gift Janice Daniels had received the day she signed the trust agreement, the same one Preston had illegally dissolved. So much had already been exposed. But not the most painful truth. Not yet. She took a deep breath and opened a second folder she had hidden under her clutch. Inside hospital reports, signed affidavits, and one final piece of evidence, a letter written by her mother on the last night she was alive. Back then, no one had believed Janice. Her reputation had been destroyed, her assets frozen. Her name dragged through press releases full of strategic ambiguity and quiet racism. Preston's smear campaign had worked. Amara had watched it happen from behind a bedroom door. She was 17. And powerless. Until now. Downstairs, the ballroom was in chaos. The music had stopped. The guests were scattering, some horrified, some thrilled to have been present for what was already trending online as toward the gala reckoning. Every outlet from Bloomberg to BuzzFeed had picked up the story. Amara Daniels, the lost heiress of Vale Tech. Preston, meanwhile, had been cornered by the board. David Hightower now had legal counsel at his side. You're going to sign the transfer of interim authority, Hightower said, placing a single sheet of paper before him. Preston's hand trembled. He looked up at Clarissa seated across the room, with her hands over her mouth, eyes swollen with betrayal. Please, Preston whispered, you know me. I did, Clarissa replied. I don't anymore. Amara stepped into the ballroom once more, this time holding a framed photo. The room hushed again. This is the last thing my mother ever gave me, she said, raising the frame. It's a picture of her with Walter Vale and the original prototype. Behind it, she had taped a letter. She unfolded it carefully and read aloud. If you're reading this, my sweet girl, it means they've taken everything from me. I want you to know none of this is your fault. I never stole anything. I built those things with love and intellect and years of work. They feared what I represented. They feared what you represent. But don't let that fear change you. One day you'll rise. And when you do it with dignity, Amara's voice cracked, but she kept reading. The world won't hand you justice, baby. You'll have to build it yourself. But you come from steel. You're not broken. You're forged. Silence. Tears ran down Clarissa's cheek. Even David Hightower looked down ashamed. Someone in the back whispered, "She was telling the truth all along." Amara raised her chin. "I'm not here to destroy Veil Tech. I'm here to restore it, to prove that integrity doesn't need a pedigree." Behind her, a door opened quietly. An older woman stepped through short gray hair, smart suit, and a face that made Preston go stiff with dread. It was Naomi Everett, Janice Daniels' former assistant, once fired and blacklisted by the company under mysterious circumstances. Naomi held a flash drive high. This contains a full backup of Janice's drives. Every file, every memo, every prototype draft. Gasps echoed. Hightower turned to Amara. "Ms. Daniels, or should I say Ms. Vale, the board would like to speak with you in private." Amara nodded. "Of course. But make no mistake, this won't be private for long. The truth never stays buried." Outside, the media swarmed. Reporters crowded at the gates, helicopters circled above, and social feeds exploded with clips of Amara's speech. And in a single night, Preston Vale went from billionaire tech mogul to disgraced fraud. But Amara She had just begun. A seat at the table. 3 hours later, Amara sat in the boardroom that had once denied her mother a voice. Now it was silent and waiting for hers. 12 board members filled the long mahogany table. Some looked apologetic. Some looked terrified. And a few, the kind who had once laughed off Janice Daniels as a liability, now pretended to have always respected her. David Hightower cleared his throat. "Ms. Daniels, thank you for agreeing to speak with us privately." Amara leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here for pleasantries, Mr. Hightower." He nodded. "Fair. But we do want to hear what you want." Amara placed her hands on the table, steady calm, but carrying the weight of generations. "I want what was mine. What was my mother's. What should have never been stolen." She reached into her folder and pulled out 2 documents. The trust my grandfather created, and the board acknowledgement of Janice Daniels' 20% co-founder stake signed in 1993. You have copies in your records. You just never thought they'd resurface. Several members glanced at each other. "Guilty. I'm invoking my rightful claim to those shares, retroactively." "That makes you the largest private stakeholder in Veil Tech," someone whispered. Amara nodded. "Correct. And by that authority, I also move for a vote of no confidence in Preston Vale's leadership and recommend immediate restructuring, including a diversity and ethics oversight committee reinstatement of all unfairly dismissed employees and a full internal audit." David Hightower blinked, then smiled slowly. "You came prepared. I've been preparing my entire life." The vote was unanimous. Preston's era was over, and within 24 hours, an emergency press conference was announced. At its center was Amara Daniels, newly appointed executive chair of the Veil Tech board. The press flooded the lawn of the estate, questions, flying flashes bursting. "Ms. Daniels, will you be changing the company name?" "No," Amara said firmly, "but I'll be changing what it stands for." Back in New York, Amara stood inside her mother's old brownstone. The walls were still lined with dusty books, research notes, and blueprints. She hadn't sold it, not yet. She couldn't. It was the last place her mother had felt like herself. On the mantel was a photo of Janice smiling. Amara lit a candle beside it. "I did it, Mom," she whispered. "But I didn't win because I became like them. I won because I stayed like you." That evening, a handwritten note arrived at Vale Tech HQ. It was from Clarissa Vale. "Amara, I don't have the words, but I do have the truth. If you ever wish to speak, I'm ready to listen." Clarissa Amara folded it, set it aside. She wasn't sure if forgiveness was part of this journey, but she knew truth was. And that was enough for now. Upstairs in her new office, Amara Daniels looked out the massive glass window. Below, the company hummed with a new kind of energy. People were smiling. Teams were working late, not out of fear, but belief. She turned back to her desk, where a small brass plaque had just been installed. Janice Daniels Innovation Lab, in honor of a legacy reclaimed. She ran her fingers across it. Tomorrow she would start restructuring. Tonight she would rest. Justice had finally taken its seat. The rebuilding. In the weeks that followed, the gala, Vale Tech underwent a transformation unlike any it had seen in its 5-decade history. Gone were the mahogany walls lined with portraits of only white men. Gone were the executive parking spaces labeled with pretentious titles and inflated egos. Gone was the culture of silence that had stifled whistleblowers and buried innovation. Amara Daniels, now chairwoman and interim CEO, redesigned not just policies, but principles. Her first executive decision was to establish the Daniels Foundation, an internal initiative to fund scholarships, tech incubators for marginalized youth, and full tuition reimbursement for any Vale Tech employee returning to school. Her second was more personal. She hired back Naomi Everett, her mother's former assistant, and appointed her chief operating officer. Naomi's voice had been silenced for decades. Now it would guide the ship. The media attention hadn't let up. Articles hailed Amara as the Phoenix of Vale Tech. Some called her the face of modern corporate redemption, but she didn't care about headlines. What she cared about were the people in the mailroom, the janitorial team, the cafeteria, who now had names and badges and access to resources they'd never been offered under Preston's regime. When she walked through the halls, they didn't lower their eyes anymore. They met hers and smiled. Meanwhile, Preston Vale sat in a private villa in Switzerland. His passport had been revoked. Multiple investigations were pending. His assets had been frozen under an SEC inquiry. But what stung most wasn't the loss of money. It was the loss of illusion. He had grown up believing the world owed him reverence, that his wealth protected him from consequences, that people like Amara didn't matter. He was wrong. One rainy afternoon, a package arrived for Amara. It was unmarked, inside a tattered journal. The cover read, J.D., 1992. It was her mother's handwriting. The journal had somehow survived. Inside were entries raw, brilliant, defiant. Details of early chip designs, business meetings, and late-night thoughts about being a black woman in boardrooms that always felt one earthquake away from collapse. One passage stopped Amara cold. "They think they've erased me, but I'm building blueprints they'll never understand. Because I'm not designing chips, I'm designing a daughter who will finish what I started." Amara clutched the book to her chest. Tears streaming silently. The storm was over. But her real work had just begun. Confronting the ghosts. Despite the accolades, Amara knew she couldn't move forward without confronting the deepest wound left behind her father's absence. Walter Vale had died when she was 12. She never knew him personally, never even met him in private. He had been a name whispered through door cracks, a blurred face in press photos beside her mother, always distant, always protected by layers of power and shame. But now, as chairwoman of the very empire he once led, Amara stood in the company's private archive room, staring at his old personal files. The access code hadn't been changed in 20 years. his favorite number 13. The room smelled like forgotten years' paper and wood polish ambition and regret. Inside, she found a file labeled JD Confidential. It was a letter. Unsent. Janice, I can't fix this. Not anymore. The pressure from the board, the optics, the race of it all, it's bigger than me. But I swear I didn't authorize the trust's removal. That was Preston. I confronted him. He told me to step aside. I fear what he's becoming. I fear what I've created. If anything happens to me, make sure Amara knows I loved her, and that she deserved the world. Amara read the letter 3 times. She didn't know what to feel. Was it cowardice? Was it confession? Or was it too little too late? She slipped the letter into her coat pocket, not to forget, but to remember. Not all legacies are clean, but that doesn't mean they can't be redefined. That night, Amara took the train back to Brooklyn. Even now, after reclaiming everything, she still kept her mother's apartment. It had become a sanctuary, a museum of memory. She passed the corner store where Janice used to buy groceries with coupons, the school where Amara had spent nights in the library while her mom cleaned offices, the mural wall down the block that still bore her mother's face, painted by a local artist after her death. She ran her fingers along the chipped edges of the bricks. They felt solid, real, unlike the polished illusions of the ballroom. Back in the apartment, she cooked dinner just for herself. Rice and vegetables, simple like her mother used to make. She sat at the tiny kitchen table, the same one Janice had cried over during court calls and tax threats and denial letters. Only now there were no more letters. There was only a future, hers to build. A new era begins. 3 months had passed since the gala that shook corporate America. Under Amara's leadership, Vailtech had not just survived it, thrived. Quarterly profits were up 28%, but more than that, the company culture had transformed. Transparency became a mandate, not a marketing slogan. Employee equity programs were rolled out company-wide. An internal hotline was created not for complaints, but for ideas. Any employee, regardless of rank, could pitch innovations directly to a review panel. And once a week, Amara hosted Open Chair, Friday an unfiltered conversation circle where even interns could sit beside executives and share. No NDAs, no posturing, just voices. People began calling it the Daniels Doctrine, the belief that justice and innovation weren't opposing forces, but symbiotic ones. But not everyone applauded. Some media outlets questioned whether she was too emotional to lead. A few investors privately whispered doubts, calling her reforms idealistic. Amara responded not with speeches, but with numbers. Record productivity. Lowest employee turnover in company history. Patents filed at double the previous rate. She knew the whispers came from the same mindset that once tried to erase her mother. She didn't fight them with rage. She fought them with results. One morning she received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Amara, I've read every headline, watched every video. You were right. I stole from you from your mother from this company. I thought I was protecting a legacy, but I was only protecting myself. I know prison is coming. I deserve it. But if you ever decide to speak to me, I'll be here. Preston. She read the letter twice, folded it gently, filed it under unfinished business. She didn't hate him, but she wouldn't let him forget. Later that day, she walked into the lobby of Vailtech and saw something she hadn't expected. A group of schoolgirls, black, brown, South Asian, on a field trip, looking up at the new wall of innovation that bore a massive portrait of Janice Daniels smiling in mid-laugh beside an early chip prototype. One of the girls whispered, "She kinda looks like you." Amara smiled. "She should," she said. "She's my mom." The girl's eyes widened. "Wait, you run this place?" Amara crouched beside her, meeting her gaze. I do. And one day maybe you will too. Full circle. The auditorium was packed. Students, educators, entrepreneurs, and activists had gathered for the annual Future Leaders Summit at Columbia University, where Amara Daniels had been invited as the keynote speaker. She stood backstage adjusting the lapel of her navy blue suit, tailored timeless and quietly powerful. In her breast pocket, she carried a photo of her mother folded neatly beside Walter Vail's unsent letter. When her name was announced, the applause was thunderous. She walked onto the stage with quiet confidence, not waving, not smiling theatrically, just standing tall. The moderator offered her the mic. Ms. Daniels, he said, the world has called your journey many things. Revenge, redemption, revolution. What do you call it? Amara looked out at the crowd of young faces. Restoration. Silence hung for a moment, respectful, curious. She continued. My mother wasn't erased because she was incompetent. She was erased because she was inconvenient, because her brilliance didn't fit the narrative. She paused. They thought that if they took her name off the wall, no one would remember her. That if they took her voice away, she'd never be heard. But I'm here because her whispers never died. The audience leaned in closer. And what I've learned, Amara said slowly, is that sometimes justice doesn't come in the form of a verdict or a headline. Sometimes it comes when the daughter of the woman they silenced stands on the same stage they tried to block her from. A few stood. Then more. Then all. The room erupted into a standing ovation. After the speech, a young woman approached her backstage. She was 19, wearing a thrifted blazer 2 sizes too big, and holding a resume in one hand and trembling slightly. Ms. Daniels, she said, I don't have connections, but I have ideas. I have drive. I want to build something. But I don't know if people like me ever get the chance. Amara smiled gently. You just did. She handed the girl her card. Call my office Monday. We'll make space. That night, Amara returned to her home, not a mansion, but a sunlit brownstone in Harlem she'd renovated herself. Waiting at the door were 2 children siblings she had adopted the previous year. Jada, 7, and Malik, 10. Both orphans of a system that forgot them the way the world had once tried to forget her. They rushed into her arms. You're home, Jada squealed. Amara kissed their foreheads. I promised I would be. Upstairs, she tucked them in and sat at her desk, writing in a new journal. Mom, today, a girl asked me if someone like her could ever build something that matters. I told her yes, and I knew you'd be proud. Amara Daniels hadn't just reclaimed a legacy. She had built a ladder, so the next girl wouldn't have to claw her way up alone. Final reflection. The weight of truth. Personal reflection stories, like Amara Daniels, are rare, not because women like her don't exist, but because their voices have too often been silenced before they had the chance to speak. What makes this story remarkable isn't just the elegance of her revenge, or the spectacle of justice, it's the grace with which she handled every step. She had every reason to burn it all down, but instead she rebuilt. When the world gave her a mop, she used it to clean away centuries of prejudice, not just for herself, but for everyone watching from the shadows. Her victory wasn't in the headlines. It wasn't in the lawsuit. It wasn't even in the boardroom. It was in the way she carried her mother's memory forward, quietly, fiercely, without apology. She didn't become powerful despite what happened to her. She became powerful because of how she responded to it. Emotional lessons. At its heart, this story is about more than corporate betrayal or secret inheritances. It's about the cost of dignity, the emotional labor of being unseen in a room full of people looking straight at you, the rage that bubbles when your ideas are stolen, your name forgotten, and your identity rewritten. It's about the long game of justice, the patience required to gather the receipts, endure the mockery, and choose the moment when truth becomes louder than power. Amara Daniels reminds us that grief and purpose can coexist, that wounds can become weapons not of destruction, but of healing. Social perspective. Amara's story is a mirror to our modern world, where racism, classism, and corporate corruption still run rampant behind glossy mission statements and diversity panels. But it also shows us what happens when the underestimated rise, when the cleaning lady turns out to be the heir, when the woman in the back of the room suddenly holds the microphone. It forces us to ask, who do we exclude without realizing? Who do we erase for the sake of convenience? What brilliance have we missed because it didn't wear the right suit? A practical life lesson. We all face injustices, some quiet, some loud. You might not have a microphone today. You might not have allies or money or even clarity. But if you hold on to your truth, if you keep your receipts, if you know who you are when the room tries to tell you otherwise, you are already powerful. Justice is not about revenge. It's about restoration. And the best way to dismantle a corrupt system isn't to scream at its walls. It's to walk inside, sit at its biggest table and say, "You forgot someone. I'm here now.